The Bishop's Corner is a production of CTNY, the Catholic television network of the Diocese of Youngstown. It is a show highlighting the new evangelization called for by Pope Benedict XVI, who calls the Church to proclaim in word and deed the gospel of God to all people. Your host is Bishop George Murray, and your moderator is Father Jim Corda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Bishop's Corner. I'm your moderator, Father Jim Corda.
And I'm Bishop George Murray. Welcome to our series on the new evangelization.
And joining us at the top of our show is Terry Sapancic. Nice to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And we're going to be talking primarily in this short time together about New Catholics and the RCIA. So let's have Terry explain what RCIA means.
The RCIA process is a rite of Christian initiation of adults. And this process has come about because of Vatican II, but goes back way in the first 4 centuries of our faith. And we are, it's a way to revitalize our parishes, but also to invite and be present to those who are inquiring into the faith or looking for a place to be a part of.
And Bishop, we talked at one of our last shows about evangelization as a process. And so RCIA, inviting new Catholics, is really a process for them. In your experience, how important is that process for new Catholics?
In talking to new Catholics, especially those who in our own diocese have gone through the RCIA program, they tell me that they found that to be extremely helpful for them because they learned the history and the traditions of the church. They had an opportunity to ask questions about things that in church teaching that they may not understand. And another important part were the people who were involved in that. They were walking with others who were also trying to learn more about their faith and could support each other.
Well, you know, that's so important for us as Catholics because oftentimes we get in our mind that once we're done with a certain sacrament or a certain grade level, then we're done learning. But how many Catholics that are part of the RCIA program learn so much more and are amazed at Terry, at what they actually didn't know?
That is so true. We find that those who act as sponsors from our parish with our catechumens or candidates really learn so much, and they feel that this was such a commitment that they were so glad they made. You know, that fear of making that kind of commitment is hard, but they just come out just renewed in their faith, and that's the key of all of this.
You know, oftentimes when I think of people wanting to come to the church to become Catholic, new Catholics, I always figure in my mind that somehow they're being loved into the church. There's something that's drawing them. And oftentimes we see this with someone who's engaged, who's not Catholic, who wants to share the same faith of their partner for life. And so they're really loved into the church. And how important is that whole concept in the process of new Catholics becoming part of the church, to be loved in the church?
Father, I really like that image of being loved into the church because I think that's exactly what we see in the scriptures when Jesus encounters people. The woman at the well, he communicated that he cared about that woman. The blind man on the road to Jericho, he cared about him. He showed them love, and they in turn wanted to be with him. That line at the end of the story about Bartimaeus, he followed him down the road. He wanted to walk with Jesus. And I think part of evangelization, and an essential part of evangelization, is this sense of welcoming people into our community. It's why, in a very simple sense, greeters at our churches are so very important. They're the first people that someone encounters when they walk into one of our churches. And if they are not inviting and welcoming, then people are turned away.
Let's go back briefly to that story about Bartimaeus. When he followed Jesus, if I remember the story correctly, he threw off his cloak. He left everything and he followed him. How important is that whole sense of leaving things behind, especially for new Catholics in your experience?
Well, I think that is very important, but I think their story comes with them. And as we share stories about their own journey towards us, and then us sharing our faith journey with them, begins that love process process that you mentioned so well. It really is. It's a sense of, wow, we're a lot alike. We're not that different as people might think. And so telling that story and being able to be open, and that is, it's definitely, I think, a part of this, is letting ourselves open and letting the Spirit do the work.
And when we're talking about evangelization, is there a difference theologically between Catholic evangelization and Protestant evangelization, or is it the same thing?
Oh, I think there is a theological difference. There is a basis of evangelization, which is calling people into the good news of our Lord Jesus Christ. But there is also, there are differences in how we live out that commitment. As Catholics, we have a long tradition of what it means to be a Catholic Christian. And when we evangelize into our parishes, we help our people to understand that history and that tradition and how important it is that they be faithful to that Catholic tradition.
Absolutely, and also that faith and believing become verbs. This is what we do. This is how we do it. This is why we do it. There's such mystique around the Catholic faith that some non-Catholics or those who have just been baptized in the faith but hasn't really pursued and continued in their catechesis. And when we open up those kinds of things to them and say, wow, now I understand. And when that light bulb goes on, or when we have that, what I call aha moments, they really do feel like they are in this process together with us, this journey that all of us as Catholics should be on.
And we're coming down to the first, the ending of our first segment. We want briefly to talk about those sacraments of initiation, those sacraments that the new Catholic receives at the Easter Vigil. Briefly tell us about that, Terry.
The first one, of course, is baptism. If you have not been baptized in another Christian faith that our Catholic Church recognizes, then we baptize. And then you're invited to confirmation and Eucharist through the process. So that process is very well established. Our rite is beautiful. Our minor rites really speak to so much of what we have been in our history and have done. So we're really, it's a beautiful, beautiful process, and we try to encourage as many people as possible.
Bishop Murray, as the minister of confirmation, how important is that sacrament that you share with the people?
Well, it goes back to what Terry was saying about verbs. One of the things that I try to communicate to people, especially young people during the experience of confirmation, is that they have to be active. They cannot be passive. They need to carry on the message and the work of Jesus Christ in everything they do. They have to be actively involved in the world to transform the world into the kingdom of God.
We're going to talk a little bit more, but we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I am Marino.
Je suis Marino.
I am Marino.
I believe that we are all connected to each other, and that is the gift of compassion that unites us and makes us one. It doesn't matter what language, culture, or tradition we come from. We can share compassion wherever we are.
Marino, an American Catholic organization of priests and brothers, has been reaching out to those in need for nearly 100 years in 26 countries throughout the world. Marino dedicates 86 cents of every dollar donated to their programs, and with your help, they can do more. Missioners, workers, volunteers, supporters, we are all Marino.
I am Marino.
Yo soy Marino.
I'm Father Mike, and I am Marino.
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 Dear Mrs. Crandall, it's easy to get so busy we can forget there are others who need our help.
Let's work on your reading, okay?
You can see.
Vanessa, you're next.
At the seashore, you can learn about the tides, the seagulls and the beach.
By taking the time to help my daughter read, you've become her hero and mine.
Make a difference. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Welcome back to our show on the new evangelization. We're talking primarily about evangelization, about new Catholics, but now we want to talk about adult formation. Once someone is in the church, new Catholic, cradle Catholic, let's talk about formation, because it doesn't stop with the sacrament of confirmation. Learning and growing and understanding the faith is a process.
Absolutely, and this process needs to continue in all phases of our lives as we go through this journey and all the life stages that we go through as adults growing in this faith. One of the, I think, things that parishes really need to look at is what kind of adult formation are we offering in different ways, whether it's through the liturgy, through the RCIA process itself, or adult education or family education. All of these things are so important. And so now with the media changing and everything else, we've really got to look at how are we reaching the masses a little bit more, and our diocese is trying to do that.
Bishop, tell us what your hope is for the formation of adults and Catholics within the diocese on evangelization.
My hope is that we will utilize every possible avenue to communicate that that education in our faith is an ongoing experience and is something which is available to people across the diocese and across our country and around the world. I think we have to use all the new forms of media. We have to use the internet. We have to use television, which is why I'm so happy that we have a chance to do this today. We have to use radio. We use the printed media. Using all of those different forms to get out the word that we can't stop growing in our faith. Our faith dies when it becomes stagnant. We have to continue to grow. We have to continue to learn as much as we can about what the Lord is calling us to do and to be.
Absolutely.
Now, how do we focus on the normal person? I hate to use that word, but the people in the pew. They're the everyday people that are coming to Mass. The large percentage of them are just coming to church. How do we reach out to them? What kind of evangelization efforts can we do specifically for that normal person in the pew? Terry?
Well, I think everything from looking at our stewardship programs, the evangelization programs, all of those things where we are continually inviting people to come to a different level of their faith. And we have these different stages in our lives, so when we find those opportunities, when we are encountering people in a different way, whether it be our interviewing new parishioners as they get registered, from that simple process to those who are searching with questions, who have definite questions they want answered. Everything we do, from the first time they see someone at the back of church, in the greeter, or to when they come into the parish office and the secretary greets them, we've got to be there inviting. It has to be that inviting time.
And Father, I think that there's also the dimension that you mentioned, which is extremely important, that most Catholics are in church only on Sunday. So as priests, as lay leaders, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to use that time to help them deepen their faith. I think it's very important for us as priests to spend quality time developing our homilies. I think it's important that we have good music that brings people more deeply into their faith. I think it's important that we have programs in our parishes where adults and young people can come weeknights or weekends where they can learn about the scriptures. They can learn about what the church teaches about morals. All of those things, every possible way that we can reach out and touch people's lives.
Absolutely, and when we link life and faith, so those issues that people are dealing with in their life with their faith, it becomes their faith becomes renewed and alive. Bishop has asked us in parishes to take a look at evangelization in a very serious way this year, and he brought in a wonderful speaker, Father Frank DiCiano, and he did a marvelous job in explaining a process that we're hopefully a lot of parishes will get involved in this fall, is about awakening faith. Whether you are in the pews or someone who is searching, we can blend these two so well with that program. So I'm very excited about that, and hopefully that so many parishes will get involved.
You know, we mentioned this whole idea of lay leadership. How important is it to form people in the faith to become leaders in our church? Because it's no longer just the priest's job. How do we do that, and why do we do that?
Well, I think it's a mentality shift. We're very used to Father doing everything. And one of the unfortunate realities we have to face is a decrease in the number of priests. Now, I think we've had a good increase in the quality of our priests. I think we have excellent priests. But we can do much more if we work together rather than work separately. By inviting lay people to take on more responsibility in the church, by inviting lay people to be spokespersons for the teachings of the church, we can touch more lives.
And through education, we can do that and encourage people to continue in their growth with more degree programs, as well as the things we do locally in our parishes. But I do believe that as a team, forming teams of parish and lay, of priests and laity is the best way to go. And we will just entice more people to be involved.
We have about 2 minutes left in this segment. There are people that I know, some older people say, oh, I'm too old to learn that stuff. That's obviously a fallacy, because I think when older Catholics come to the table to learn and to be formed, their eyes are open, their hearts are open, and how important is that that we form them even though they feel they can't be formed or become leaders.
I think that's so important. When I have my women's prayer breakfast, and they're mostly older women who feel a sense they can come out during the day and do these kinds of things, I really feel that I learned so much from them, and they have to take that responsibility. Our baptismal call never ends, that we have to keep sharing, that we have to keep telling our stories over and over again. And when they know how important, and that people are there listening and watching them and being able to tell how their faith and life have crossed, we can make a difference. And they have so much to give to us.
And Bishop, what would you like to tell the people that have taken the responsibility of becoming leaders within their parish and within their community to be evangelizers?
I would like to first and foremost thank them for picking up that important role in the church. And I'd like to encourage them to continue to pray and continue to work to make Christ known to all the people that they meet.
Terry, thank you for being with us. We're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
There is a place where a total stranger will give you their blood. There is a place where someone you never knew will save your child from drowning. A place where people from 7 states away will turn up at your door and give you food and shelter after a flood. There's a place where a person who doesn't look like you, talk like you, or dress like you will stretch out their hand and put it across your shoulders and say, everything is going to be okay. That place is called America, where we look out for each other, and it's up to us to keep it that way. When you help the American Red Cross, you help America.
Patience. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Welcome back to our show. Joining us now is Father Ed Noga. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
We're going to talk primarily about preaching the good news, but before we get into that, let's define that word kerygma and how important is that in that whole concept of preaching. Bishop?
Kerygma refers to the central concept of the gospel. What is it that, when you boil the gospel down, what is the most important message in the gospel? And that is that we are created and loved by God and saved by God, saved through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. What we have to preach, what we are called to preach in all that we do, is that we live in God through Jesus Christ.
You know, oftentimes, years ago when Father Noga and I were in the seminary, we heard about the charismatic movement and being charismatic, but what brought to mind now is being charismatic. Does that make sense?
Yes,
that we're,
sure.
you know,
Sure.
we're to be people that are charismatic, to share that good news. And tell us how you do that in your preaching especially.
Well, going back to the reference you just made about the seminary, we had a Lutheran pastor taught us homiletics, and one of his statements, which has always stuck with me, he said, "Gentlemen, whenever you speak most personally, you will speak most universally." And he said, and I'll go so far as to say that when you're kind of hitting the mark, you'll actually see people nod just a little bit because they're thinking, "Oh yeah, that is what I experience." And I think the message in our preaching has to be hitting their heart to make them understand that we're not just giving some theological opinion or a theological history lesson, but something that goes right to our heart. And it certainly dovetails on what the bishop just said in defining kerygma, that, it's, how does the message, the mission of Jesus affect me personally? How do I carry that on?
And I think when we talk about preaching, oftentimes I'll get someone that'll tell me after Mass, "You were speaking right to me." Right. And I think for me, I oftentimes say to them, well, I was speaking to myself, because I need to hear that message first. And so how important is that for us to be evangelized first before we preach to others?
Well, it's an ongoing process, as we said earlier. It's not as if it gets to the point where we are thoroughly evangelized ourselves and then we are going out to others. We are helping the people in front of us to come to know the Lord, and they help us. It's very important for us to realize that they are helping us. We can be inspired by their faith and by their courage, and together we can grow closer to God.
We talked at our last segment about lay leadership and how inviting them to be people who evangelize is so important. How important is it for our Catholics to be heralds of the good news, and why is that important for them also to be people who share the good news and evangelize?
Well, I think sometimes, folks look at us as the shepherds, of the flock, and yet I remember working a RCIA once where a gentleman in his talk said, well, that's true, but he said, if the Lord is truly our shepherd, then we're all kind of the sheep following. And I like that image because it reminds us then that it's not just my job, it's all of our jobs. And even though they say, well, that is your job, it is, but it's to guide the folks in the pews, our parishes, our congregations, to realize that they're going to touch many more people in a week than I am, just because of the fact that they travel in different circles. So they need to be aware that they bring what I might be preaching or we might be preaching into those everyday situations.
Let's take a look briefly at the biblical person of John the Baptist, who was the herald of Jesus. And how important is that for us to understand and to resonate with John the Baptist as heralds of good news? Bishop?
John the Baptist is a fascinating character, and Franco Zeffirelli did a movie around 1979 where he presented John the Baptist as a near madman, out in the desert shouting and eating strange food. But what Zeffirelli did so nicely was help the person watching the movie to realize that John the Baptist was speaking to us by having John the Baptist turn to the camera. So he's shouting at us. And it's never about John, it's always to point us in the direction of looking at Jesus. And that's what we do, I think, in our leadership roles as ordained ministers. We need to call the best out of our people so that they can not be blocked in any way from seeing the Lord. And they, in the same way, challenge us to grow in our faith, to grow in our commitment, so that we can see the Lord and reflect that back to them.
I think, too, that John was a fiery character. He had a lot of fire in his belly. And in his preaching and in his being a prophet and preparing the way for the Lord, I mean, he was excited. He was a character. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, the folks kind of think, well, in our religion, we're kind of a little meek and timid and all that. No, he's telling us what we believe should really be burning in our heart, and we should be real active and fiery and let people know that we really believe this.
Yeah. In our preaching, when we're up there on Sundays to proclaim the gospel and then to preach about it, what are some of the tools that we need to use so it's not about me, but it's about the Lord, and it's about us, and it's about spreading the good news and bringing others to Christ? What are some tools that we can use personally for ourselves as preachers?
Well, I think one thing that's very helpful, and Father Noga mentioned it, is there's a real advantage to being in a parish because you get to know the people. You know where they are, you know what their concerns are, you know what's bothering them and what's exciting them. To be able to speak to the needs of your people, I think, is extremely important and influential. And I think how we do that, it's one of the reasons that we study homiletics in the seminary, because we learn different methods of doing that. We can use a teaching method, we can use humor, we can use personal examples, we can use a variety of methods of communication to get to touch the hearts of our people, so that, as it says in the Old Testament, we can help those hearts to become hearts of flesh rather than hearts of stone.
We've got about 1 minute left. I want to ask Father Noga this question. For us as priests, when we go around, for example, to other parishes and preach, do you find yourself preaching the same way that you would preach in the parish in which you serve, or do you change the way you preach?
Well, I think that, every parish, every congregation has a personality, like the three of us have personalities. And I think, when I'm going somewhere to give a talk on whatever it is, or to cover for a priest of that, I do like to ask the secretary or some folks, just give me a little bit of background. I think we all know some of that, but it's also very helpful when we get that. I think right from the beginning, as you're walking into church, people singing, how they greet you and all that, I think you start to get a feel right away for that. And luckily, most of the feeling is, I think, what we usually experience. But I try to preach the same wherever I'm at.
Father Ed, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
On our show today, and thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
The Bishop's Corner is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your host has been Bishop George Murray, and your moderator was Father Jim Corda.